It's Christmas Day, so I'm going to be ranking 25 of the most popular Christmas movies on the 25th of December for my first ever 25 on 25 Christmas movies, so let's talk about them. Welcome Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below how you would rank all of these 25 movies of the Christmas movies that we've got collaborated with this list. I put this out as a community challenge. I'm going to be posting any other videos on my story of what all other people have ranked for this. Whether you want to rank it in the comments, another video, other thing that goes along the lines of that. And this is just my personal taste. It's not the right list. There's going to be hot takes, other things where you don't necessarily connect to a film in the same way. So this is just my personal ranking, but I'd love to see your list down in the comments below alongside any of your favorite movies of all time that is collaborating with the Christmas theme. Coming in last place, we have Last Christmas. Paul Feig is a great director that I've seen a few of his works. Certain things that work along the way with this film unfortunately falls flat for me. I'm a rom-com guy. Maybe I watched this at the wrong place and wrong time, just not necessarily clicking with the right chemistry that is all going on screen. Emilia Clarke is someone that I do appreciate as an actor, but the chemistry just doesn't always spark a flair within my personal taste. What's all going on screen? The twist revealed at the end is something that sort of got to me, but it came a little bit too late within the film for the blandness that this film ultimately brought out. Maybe it needs a rewatch. I'm still open to any of these films getting a rewatch, of course, especially the better ones, but for me personally, what we got out of Last Christmas, how it pulls off this different sort of environment, just goes about a sense of distaste that didn't ultimately work for me by the end. Coming in at number 24, we have Home Alone 2. Yes, my first hot take on this list. I just don't personally connect with this film quite as well. It does have its favorable moments, but it certainly does feel like a copy and paste of the first Home Alone, taking it into this, but there's distasteful and mean-spirited moments that just don't always flow about along the way. Certain things that feel contrived, that even if it is a light-hearted Christmas film that does have its moments that work emotionally with me. What we get out of Kevin McAllister once more, and the Wet Bandits become the Sticky Bandits. There's moments that still excrete the Christmas spirit out of what we get from this film. There's some moments that just delights my essence of what I'm wanting to watch from this, and I'll still rewatch it time and time again, just being able to get all that Christmas spirit out of the film. But ultimately, there's some moments that just feel forced. The bird lady in place of the old man just feels like a copy that is less tasteful, just doesn't exactly explain all of the thematic elements that's wanting to communicate. So just the way they go about this journey, taking it to New York, yes, I can suspend disbelief with how Kevin McAllister can do all these grown-up things, build all these traps that he doesn't necessarily have time for, to be able to pull all this off in real life and just do all these shenanigans. But that's the fun element of this film. But taking all that away, you just don't necessarily get all the right notes that work effectively for my personal taste. Which takes me into the next place. We have Christmas with the Cranks. Now this is one that I can have a guilty pleasure rewatch with, going about certain aspects of the film that are ridiculous, going about these different shenanigans that are comedic and ridiculous for the purpose of being that, just that, and just going about this holiday fest where this one family is just trying to get rid of Christmas for their thing, get on a holiday vacation to separate themselves from all the budgeting that's all going on, where it's a cheaper route to go on this vacation, and certain things go about along the way where it's just way too wild. In some sense, certain things can be mean-spirited to the sense where all the neighbors, everyone is against them taking their own vacation, getting rid of Christmas, which doesn't necessarily always make sense. But there's also the extreme where you don't necessarily need to get rid of all of Christmas. They can do something with gift giving on the vacation or whatever goes along with that. But of course, to go full force on the idea, what's going on, getting rid of Christmas completely, yes, I am not fully against someone that would do that. And so just taking this concept, going full on out with it, it can be fun at moments, even if the mean-spirited moments don't always liven up the mood that ultimately this film can take away from. Which, going into next place, we have National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, to which this one actually went up on rewatch, despite my distaste for this film still. Next up, we have National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, to which, yes, this even went up on rewatch, and yet it's still distasteful in some sense of imagination. What you're getting out of the plot, it's random and sporadic, and I know and I can understand and appreciate some element to that, especially upon rewatch. There's a sense of unbelievability that's going full force. I'm not particularly that kind of guy that enjoys that sort of movie. There's something upon rewatch that I appreciated. I respected the route I was going with it. It still had a lively environment that was building up that takes it a little bit above Christmas with the Cranks because of the Christmas magic, certain aspects, the gifts of giving, certain elements where you can sort of relate to maybe certain relatives that are placed within what this film is all going about. I don't personally connect to any sort of shenanigans that's all going about what this all. My family can be a bit more tame, but the way they go about that, understanding comedies, being able to respect what it's going about, and knowing what it was all building up to, can take all these sporadic moments, build upon things that are ridiculous for the sake of being just that. And so just taking all of that into account, while it may not be a film I'll be still rewatching anytime soon, it's one that I may be still opening up my mind to, understanding and building upon the grounds of what all I can expect when watching this film. So while unfortunately it still isn't one that I can enjoy as much as everyone else, it's something that livens up the experience a little bit more than what we got in the previous few. And coming in at number 21, we have Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Now, as a child, I remember I used to love the heartwarming type of feel that this film gave off, but when you rewatch it much later, it feels like it comes off so much more mean-spirited. Based on the book and song of the same name, it just doesn't really have the delightful feel that you may want to have in this essence, and it's aged in some sense to the way it wants to communicate its themes, but comes off worse than it ends up trying to be. Doesn't necessarily communicate the strong sense of acceptance that it wants to try and build upon its own thematic elements. And in one sense, even at just over an hour, it can feel too long in some sense. Maybe it could have been a half-hour one like what we get out of Frosty the Snowman. There are certain things where certain subplots just don't feel like they're inserted in with the right place. The pacing can feel a little clunky with the structure, how it's all laid out, how things just play out along the way. Certain things that just don't necessarily feel like they're building and adding to the story as a whole. So there are certain things where yes, there's danger, certain things that can build the stakes along the way that can enlighten the experience in one sense, build upon what you're already starting with, but it can also start as distraction from what the main focus is, how they're building upon Rudolph, and certain things that just don't always resolve itself with the way that all flows on throughout, certain things where it doesn't necessarily feel as important that Rudolph's there until the end, so at the same time can feel contrived by the timing that all things are played out in the way that they are. Which takes us into number 20, which we have Ernest Saves Christmas. The way this story flows out can be ridiculous and silly in the way that I wouldn't necessarily want always to be. Like I said, I'm not always digging comedies, but this one surprisingly worked for me to the relative idea of what you're building up with Ernest. I haven't seen any of the other Ernest films, but it can be watched on its own for the nature of what it all builds on its environment, and surprisingly has a great Santa Claus. I didn't expect the structure of the story to fit so well, but still flows in a nice manner, doesn't feel too sporadic with what it's trying to do. There are a couple side plots that don't always feel like they're a part of the film, but when you look at the different character arcs that they're building upon, you get Ernest, you get this one teenage girl that's sort of rebellious in one sense, and you get Santa, and they all fit into different parts of the story where they sort of stray off a little bit at different points. Ernest can be just the comedy genius of what he's all pulling on with this film, doesn't necessarily always have the sense of what he's doing, but his character doesn't break out of being ridiculous, and surprisingly that works effectively with the right amount of drama that's pulled into it. The possibility of Santa not being able to deliver presents on Christmas since he's stranded, brought down, and then there's another subplot with the reindeer, how that's affecting the airport security, how that all flows on throughout. It just makes it just a different sort of film that I wouldn't have expected going into this for the first time for this ranking, and just being able to enjoy the shenanigans for what they are, building upon the plot that was kind of simple and basic, nothing too extravagant, doesn't have the most extravagant themes or anything along the lines of that, but that's also where this film surprised me, is just its simplicity built upon a lovely Santa Claus film that was still about Ernest just being this goofy comedy guy, that also built upon other characters that enforced the comedy, enforced the drama moments, that gave off a right mixture of both of them. So that's just something that really elevated this film that much more. Next up, we have Terrifier 3. This is exactly the opposite of what you got out of Ernest, just going full horror mode and being a recent 2024 representation for this list that I felt people were talking about just enough that really was livening up certain elements of the Christmas experience, and also being almost the exact opposite of what you expect out of a Christmas film. But Art the Clown is just a killer experience to be reckoned with. Just what we get out of Damien Leone as a director pulls off something stronger and the best out of the franchise that I personally experienced, not being a fan of the first two, this one being the pure Christmas bread one, and just going all shenanigans, bloody and gory in all its glory, and just the ability to do that. And while it can turn some people off, this still is technically, by the fullest extent, a Christmas film that goes to different routes, goes and builds upon its characters in ways that I didn't expect, to flesh them out, even though you get this non-speaking psychotic killer clown that's on the loose and being able to go after the main characters, chase certain things, and not necessarily having the limits that takes away the limitations of what is all at stake, and just going all bloody on the effects and practical, just the ability to pull that off and take all these things in different directions obviously could get so much more worse over time, but this is one of the bloodiest or horrifying films that you really could experience in some extent, just when you're talking about this hacking job and ability to go in different directions that you just do not expect this one Art the Clown to be as creepy as he is, and just pull off this interesting interesting story that is clever and sporadic, but also manages to stay honed in on its focus, creating these characters that you kind of get the essence of what they're adding to the story as a whole. And the Christmas element as a whole just does that much more, to where you get this Santa in the bar scene, where it's absolutely my favorite part of the movie, honestly, is just the way they get Art the Clown to interact with a Santa Claus. Just works effectively to the fullest extent of what I did not expect to get from this movie. Which, going into next place, we have White Christmas. Now this one has its setbacks. It feels a little slow. You're not fully engaging with everything that's building upon, but you get some great musical numbers. The sporadic colors can heighten the experience of different things, what they're doing with the set design, the painted backdrops, the sets, everything. And then Bing Crosby giving off some of his most deeply well-toned voices for what you're getting out of the musical as a whole. They're going on different steps, and this may have been more quintessential to veterans at that time, at least being about 15 years after when World War II ended. How that pulls on throughout just makes this sort of special. I sort of get where they're going with that. It doesn't have the most quick-paced story. It's a little bit of a contrived romance story that's as predictable as it can come. But unfortunately, while there's certain things that hold it back by its own pacing, it's just kind of slow in some moments. It still livens up that Christmas momentum just with the free-spirited moments that can work even better upon rewatch for those that didn't expect it to be so different of a film against all the other type of films that have released just in this list. Next up, we have Home Alone. Yes, this low on the list, and it's still good for the nature of what it's all building upon. But for me personally, while I enjoyed it a lot upon my first watch, the constant rewatches I've done since then just haven't been quite so positive. I still enjoy it for the nature of what it's trying to do, what it's building up, but there's some comedy moments that miss the mark, certain elements that just don't feel as flavorful. I may be overthinking certain too many moments, but that's also my personality taking over, not necessarily being able to personally enjoy each and every moment that goes about and passes. And that also is speaking personally, specifically on the main home invasion that's all going about. What we get out of the Wet Bandits, while they can have great performances, they also over-exaggerate certain moments that I feel could be toned down a little bit. They don't necessarily take on the drama in the right flow. They don't mix it quite as well as I would like it to be done with the comedy. So while there can be moments here and there where I get where they're going with, I enjoy certain moments what they're doing with. I just enjoy and understand the moments that are all flowing on throughout, certain things that work effectively, have a nice Christmas theme, have a right message, especially taking on this old man and him being something that works effectively more so than the bird lady in Home Alone 2. Unfortunately, the way they flow about certain moments of the story, certain moments that feel a little bit more contrived or not so well suited for the craft of what this film is all bringing together, just doesn't necessarily fit my fancy of what's all going on throughout, just building upon its own stakes and just taking away all the caution that could help this film out a little bit more. Next up, we have Jingle All the Way, a sense of wild comedy that actually works effectively. What we get out of Arnold Schwarzenegger just trying to get this one Turbo Man action figure for his kid when it's way too late for Christmas. The way they go about that, different things, the extent he races in order to try and find one when it's just not necessarily in stores. He has to manage to go about all these different action poses, these ways of building upon himself, and the way the story all flows out goes in a silly direction, but it also works to the comedy, the right tone that it's trying to enforce and give off, and it reminds you just a lot of the 90s, how certain things can go wild over limited copies of toys, other things that builds upon the stakes of last minute Christmas shopping, just how that all goes about along the way. I haven't seen a lot of Arnold Schwarzenegger films, but this one just certainly stands out, has the right Christmas spirit, goes about this different sort of competition against someone else that is racing for the Turbo Man action figure, and there's the light-hearted family moments that also goes along with Arnold Schwarzenegger playing this father figure, being able to pull off this stunt all for his kid. Which takes us into number 15. We got The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, Jim Carrey's version, which he is absolutely great in. Now there's certain moments that can take it back. It can be a little wild in some stretch of imagination, but it still manages to carry the lighthearted feel that the original does, that the book carries on, and surprisingly, even for a short book adapted into a full feature length, longer even than the short Christmas special that they had back then, it really delivers on Ron Howard's directing, what he pulls off with this, giving all these different sets, these different environments that feel lived in, the Who's and everything that builds upon that, just the characters in that, they're quirky and weird, but it makes sense to the world that's building upon itself, and even more so, livens up certain things with the way it builds upon the Grinch's backstory, make it in him a more sensible character. You sort of generally get the ideas why he has turned so sour, so dim-witted, and so how that all flows on throughout. There's certain things where he almost is just not necessarily the character that you would want him to be, because all the town is against him, to which that's a little bit of the moments that can take me back. Everyone is so mean-spirited toward him that there's no sense of counseling, being able to enjoy or love him for who he is. There's obviously some past trauma issues that are all taken fold, and no one is there to comfort him except this little girl, Cindy Lou Who, which I love her character, how she is reinforced within this film in particular, and so that all flows on throughout. While it doesn't always fully deliver on the message based on when it was originally written, the very first book, it's a sensible kids film that you can still enjoy. It has the heart, it has the magic, so that's just something that makes this a Christmas classic that goes a little bit higher on the list. Which, going into the next place, we have Love Actually. Now this is a moment where I'm not expecting what all flows on throughout, the emotions, everything with the different mix of genres that's all going on, alongside all the different stories, different love relationships, different dramatic moments, different moments of sort of comedy mixed in here and there, the lovely family tales that are all going on, interconnected lives that all end up in this one place at this one time, this romance that's going on from this little kid to this girl, everything that pulls on through the parenthood, through the stress at work, through Christmas, everything that tackles just different moments of the Christmas spirit, and also the moments you don't necessarily love about Christmas, what happens around Christmas, just puts you in all sorts of different moods. I only watched it once, so maybe it will be a little bit more lively of an experience upon what I now know what to expect going into it. Just a different tonal shift that rather blends itself quite well together, just is unexpected in the way it manages to tell all these stories and connect them all in a way that I always enjoy those sort of films, that you connect the different lives, show they have a different impact on each other, reminding you of It's a Wonderful Life in one respect, showing where life matters at the fullest, but in a fully different development, the way the stages of this Christmas tale is told, and being able to enjoy and follow along all these characters and still track what's all going on just makes this a Christmas tale worth telling. And number 13, we have The Santa Claus, which is maybe one of my most rewatched films of all these, and it has maintained its spot within the rating of the film throughout the first time to about the 5th time I've watched it since then. And so just the ability to pull off this imagination where the Santa Claus exists, one dies in order to get Tim Allen giving off a remarkable role to replace him and having to deliver gifts to all the world. There's a psychology guy that has these weird sweaters. Ned is just a particular character to be mentioned that is standing out, but they have all these quirks, these different zany moments that sort of work for the effective flow. And there's some things about the pacing of this movie that doesn't always flow as nice. There's a little bit of things that feel like there could be a little bit more answers to how and why some people aren't questioning how fat he gets so fast, and doesn't reveal that once he shaved his beard, it grows out so quickly. It's not done in person. And so just things that come about that little things like that can arise questions. But for me personally, it's still the most lovely. Certain things where even if, like with Santa Claus 2 and 3, those two films have gone a little bit sour upon rewatch. But this one for me, even if I notice more problems, it doesn't take away from me being able to enjoy the rewatch and rewatch the experience, where it's just the epitome of a Santa Claus movie. Tim Allen just giving this realistic reaction to when he gets fat, when he grows a beard really quickly, and other things, the wonder of the North Pole, how that goes on throughout, while also being a fatherhood film that tackles him in a relationship with Charlie in a lighthearted way, the sense of believability, the ideas of telling a lie versus keeping a secret, being able to unfold the magic of why people stop believing and being able to believe in the magic that's all going on. And so just the way they tackle this makes it a Christmas classic that I would love to put further up on the list. But for the sake of some of the objective moments that just don't necessarily quite work as well with the writing, it's something that can take away some of the emotions that would ultimately make this the epitome of Christmas movies, but taking a little bit back because of all the problems I have with it. And at number 12, we have A Christmas Story. Now this one went up upon rewatch, being able to just accept it for what it was, and having these random moments that don't necessarily always work within the story that it's managing to tackle. Ralphie being just this kid, having these nostalgic Christmas moments. There's other things with the father who's a bit strict, the mother who's open-ended, and his brother, certain friends, the enemies as well. Goes about these iconic moments along the way. It may have a through plot that works effectively, that is also feeling random at the same time. Just these short snippets that doesn't necessarily feel nostalgic to me. I don't necessarily connect with all of these moments that work effectively, but even upon rewatch, it manages to pull off the nostalgic Christmas spirit that just gave me good and cheery vibes, the warmth of a Christmas tale that I just can't help but hope that it manages to maintain its placement, maintain the joy, or even more so, I enjoy it even more upon the next watch, because the ability for it to tackle all it's doing in a way that was once feeling kind of distasteful, certain things that just don't always flow about in the smoothest manner, but now upon rewatching, knowing the tone, knowing everything that takes place, it may be a comedy which I'm not always attaching myself to, but it ultimately had the laughs. It had something that worked effectively with poignant imagery, the ability to take you into this small Ohio town. Nothing really significant happens to the tale, but its simplicity can be a winning mark to it. Which goes into number 11. We have Better Watch Out, a horror Christmas story that I've watched for the first time. It's something that's very different than I expected and won't spoil for the purpose of those that haven't watched in preparation for this ranking, how that all flows throughout the way that it builds upon these different horror moments, certain things where this babysitter is taking care of this young kid, he has his friend as well, and how that pulls in different people along the way, these different bloody effects that aren't nearly as effective or big as Terrifier 3, but it's not a gore fest for the sake of being a gore fest. There's twists that come about along the way that becomes naturally crazier in the sense that it's building upon its stakes, the ability to take these story elements that you feel like it's going to be predictable, going to have all these different moments that it's a through plot that you know what's all going to happen, but about 20 minutes in, it takes a whole different route, goes about different ways that can feel maybe a little bit repetitive, goes to certain moments that it works upon what's all going about, but it still heightens the experience because new characters pop in now and then, new placements of this same setting manages to still hook you in, and even by the ending scene, it has something that's a clever tale that manages to craft something that's a sense of mystery, but also the ending payoff where you just say, that was a great way of ending the film. And even upon just having one watch, maybe it's a little bit of a recency bias, but at the same time, the emotions worked effectively, and it's a Christmas tale that really livened up what was all going on. But before we go into my top 10, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. Make sure to comment down below your list just as well, how you would rank these 25 films from your least favorite to your favorite, and if you want, you can share your favorites that aren't on your list so we can all just get some new recommendations just as well. Of course, this isn't the right list, so I'd love to see what your take on these films are just as well. Which at number 10, we have The Polar Express. Robert Zemeckis brings something magical to this, with Tom Hanks pulling off most of the roles within this. Now the CGI for its time certainly isn't the best for the way they pull off all the motion capture, everything that pulls on, but the reason that ultimately can pull this much higher up on this list is this is one of the very first films that I have a specific memory, knowing when I watched it, knowing where it sort of looked like, this being one of the very first films I watched. I don't rewatch many films, and so just being able to recall that for someone that didn't have as much film memories growing up is something extra special, but the story itself has a sense of wonders. There's certain moments that don't necessarily fully work as wonderful upon rewatch, but still the animation, certain things that it pulls on throughout, creates some sense of wonder to what they're doing with the story, the dream that's all going about, the believability and the sense of believing in Santa, the magic that's working through the train. Some of the songs are just a little wacky, but can be fun, and that's what pulls me in a little bit closer to what you're doing with the friendships that go along with the ride, certain things that builds upon the stakes that do work for me still, because certain sense of the imagination that it pulls off. And so just the wonder that it pulls, taking this new scope, these inner parts of the North Pole, taking in a different look to what you naturally expect the North Pole to look out, creating this other sort of believability while you're going about this world. It just creates these interesting characters, this interesting plot that builds upon itself in a way that I personally just enjoy the magic that is all going about upon its show. And at number 9, we have The Nightmare Before Christmas. Half Halloween, half Christmas, and a tiny midgets of Easter and other holidays mixed in within. But it's still a Christmas film at heart because it's the explanation, the discovery of Christmas that is taking in Jack Skellington and Sally in this romance, this other thing that takes on this animation, this stop motion thing that I just absolutely enjoy. The way that's all pulled off, and the catchy songs that upon rewatch I had not remembered quite so well, having not seen it in a while, and so that's just making it something that could be a little bit higher on the list, being able to just enjoy the wonder, the way that they build upon this Halloween town that feels lived in, all these different quirky and different weird characters that fit within the culture because of how it's building up, and the exploration of Christmas as what Christmas is becomes something special because you don't quite see anything like that explained in any other sense of the world, and the ability to include Santa without really defining what he is all doing within the plot. Of course, he has a crucial role, but he's not necessarily a player within the game outside of being captured for the sake of what they're all doing. These different trick-or-treaters, the boogeyman, these other quirky characters, the creator of Sally, how that pulls on throughout, mixes different sense of dramas and genres within the game of what all this movie pulls off, just making it a vibrant and free-flowing time that just pulls off the sense of both Halloween and Christmas. But even for me, I personally see it more as a Christmas film to how they flow on throughout, defining it and going throughout mistakes that Jack Skellington did and realizes who he is, realizes who Christmas belongs to, so that ultimately can pay off in a way that you don't necessarily expect for this guy that's sort of on this midlife crisis to be a part of the story, discover this new thing called Christmas, and go about this journey where he soon discovers himself again. Which, going into number 8, we have Tokyo Godfathers. Certainly something different. I don't typically watch anime, but the way this is all pulled off within a short 90 minutes just delivers on an effective, heartwarming, and heavy drama type of story about these 3 homeless strangers that sort of are acquainted with each other. They find and stumble across this baby that they catch being abandoned, and the return of that baby to its natural owner, discovering all of why it was left, why it was abandoned, and discovering more about the story along the way, meeting up with different people, going to the lengths of what they're going to return this baby to. How that all is pulled off naturally builds upon different twists and turns along the way, different pieces of information that mean that much more, because there's a story to each and every person. So how that all gets uncovered just through these 3 strangers that are acquaintances as the main focus of the story, and unraveling it to the end of the story, creates all these poignant imageries, these strong themes that mean so much. The helpfulness of strangers, the ability to live life to your fullest, and taking all these certain things where there's trauma and abuse that's taking hold, but there's also the helpfulness, the kindfulness that all unfolds within this package. That's nothing that I would have expected this film to be, especially on the first watch that I did this year for the purpose of this ranking. And so that's what really works upon the Christmas magic, not only because of the setting, the snow, the magic, the snowman, but also the kindness of the strangers that speaks more on the giving of presents to everyone that does so much more than just giving a toy or giving something to someone as a gift. Just the unfolding of what kindness is all about, what Christmas is all about, unfolds in such a great package within this film. And at number 7, we have Scrooge, the Christmas Carol representation of this list. Now it's certainly a different one, which is why I sort of chose it among all of the more casual versions, any of the regular adaptations. Scrooge, with Bill Murray, is adapting this sort of piece to where he's creating this film and he's the grouchy one, the Scrooge of what all is going on with the set, not being nice to anyone. And so how that is adapted in a twist of a tale becomes colorful in the way that's building upon itself, still taking all the natural notes of what makes sense to this story, but taking all that film twist that I personally enjoy. It's not my personal favorite of the Christmas Carol stories, but it's something that still stands out because it's unique on the way it adapts it, in the way that it unfolds, in the unraveling of him learning his lessons, meeting all those ghosts, going through this classic Christmas tale that becomes something special by the way it all goes about its own nature, building upon certain stakes, different elements that gets creative within its own craft, taking on the filmmaking perspective and inserting that into the story and becoming something that's just extra special because of the nature of how it takes takes upon this classic trail and takes it in a whole different direction. And at number 6, we have Miracle on 34th Street. Starting at the very Thanksgiving, Macy's Giving Parade, and moving on through Christmas, how that all unfolds, the natural idea of believing in Santa, and how that all uncovers different questions. This young girl questioning the beliefs, her parents are sort of revealing the truth, other things that may or may not make sense to how that unfolds. We just get this awesome Kris Kringle adaptation, this great Santa Claus role that's pulled into the mix. I just enjoy the lighthearted, the deep, warm voice that he brings on throughout. So how that works on is something very classic, but effectively works still to this day. There are certain moments that can be a little bit slow if it's your first time watch. It's not necessarily a quick paced movie, but it does have the heart, the warmth to the Christmas tale. It doesn't necessarily always work within the Christmas presents, the bows, the snow, everything that you relate to being a Christmas movie, but being based upon Santa Claus, everything that follows on throughout, the belief, the realistic ability to come off as Santa Claus, and just the ideas that unfolds because of that, the truth that makes sense for the purpose of the story, and also a different sort of lock or case that's going on whether he can claim to be Santa or not, and how that all gets ended off with its conclusion goes about in a way that's surprisingly warm-hearted, in a way that it just builds upon the nature of something that isn't complex, isn't building upon these high stakes, what will happen, but at the same time delivers on something that has a nice package by the end of the day. Kicking off my top 5, we have The Christmas Chronicles. Now this would end up probably in my top 10 Christmas movies, just because the way that Netflix brings this to life, and while they do have a sequel that's decent to its own measure, this one just works measures so much more delightfully, and the way they take on this fatherhood story, something that I can love and attach to, the way that is pulled off, just goes about this heartfelt, warm message that has its comedy moments, and we get something wonderful from the Santa Claus that we all know and love, and just the way that it builds upon the own stakes of this elements that goes about this Christmas magic where the Santa Claus crashes when they invade his sleigh, and being able to take on this own sort of adventure, going about this different plot where Santa Claus of course knows everyone can be able to take all these tricks and magic, but owes it to the kids to be able to get them out of the sticky situation that they placed them in, and just how they pulled all that off and managed to take all these things. Now there's a subjective take where there's a flaw of what ultimately is all going on at the same time, what is going on with Santa's hat that I won't spoil for those that haven't watched, but for me personally, the heart is still there. The elves is something that I find a little distaste on upon rewatch. The CGI isn't fantastic, and the look of them as a whole just doesn't fully work as a whole, but Kurt Russell is just a Santa Claus I absolutely adore. What they pull out of him, while I may prefer Tim Allen just a smidge better as a Santa Claus preference, Kurt Russell just delivers on something that's also just as charming and is placed within a tale that I enjoy quite a lot for the way they pull off this fatherhood story. There's different things where they're building upon the drama, different shenanigans that works effectively. There's edgy things that's going on with the son, but that's ultimately his Christmas wish that he's wanting to see his father return. And so that how that all unfolds, going on this sort of different Christmas adventure, makes it one that I putting on the rewatch list each year upon something that I've just been able to enjoy since I watched it for the first time. And at number 4, we have The Holdovers, a deep and melancholic, sort of lighthearted, cheery, uncomforting, but also warm-hearted sort of Christmas tale, just releasing last year, becoming something that I would honestly come and call a classic just that much quicker in a way that's pulling off all these different performances. Paul Giamatti is just great with what we get out of him, and just the kids, everything throughout. Now it has a slow start in one sense, what we're building upon a bit about it, but once you really get the kids on their own, everything that's working with Paul Giamatti, and the trio that's all working on their own sort of adventure, there's just misfits that aren't not necessarily connecting together to begin with, and how that all unravels their connection with each other. The way they're forced to get along with each other goes about these uncomfortable truths, this learning to know and love each other that becomes something deeper and so divine within the building of the relationship, the different ways that goes about different adventures, but also staying within this confined place that sort of gets you snowbound, house cold, and with the way that all goes about, just these different tales and crafting it all in this chronological winter break that they're stuck in this school just unlocks something special that I do not think could be pulled off in some other sort of way. The way they build upon these characters, the dynamics, the relationship, and just how they end up being together in the end just goes about something that obviously goes in these different twists in a way that I wouldn't expect, but taking all these different settings, both without and with the snow, just brings just so many different emotions in this 70s style intro to the film that unlocks so much, that unravels, and once you get it started, you really know the feelings that are about to go about. Next up we have Elf. Now it's another comedy, but one of my favorite comedies. So way they work wonders with Will Ferrell, who I'm not always loving as an actor, and then you get James Caan, who has this sort of stagnant fatherhood story again, once more with what I sort of enjoy out of stories. Will Ferrell being this socially awkward, sort of separated from society because he's an elf that grew up in the North Pole. How that all pulls about just makes sense for the nature of his character, going in New York City and going about all these iconic moments, these iconic lines that work effectively, that are quotable, bring up this lively experience that also blends well with the drama and the flat character that is what we're getting out of James Caan as his father. How that pulls on throughout, brings on some great performances, and then we also get this girlfriend type of character pulling on throughout the way, this joyous thing, the wonder and questioning if Santa Claus is real as well. Being able to pull all that plot together, going on this adventure to convince that the elf and what we get from the father, pulling them back together with their relationships, even with the oddities that are all going about with these cultural differences. I just really enjoy all the unraveling, the connections, making sense to the wonder of New York, and just being able to make this as a Christmas film is just definitive for what the setting is like, how it's taking all these different tropes, these elements that are so unique to the way that Jon Favreau crafts. The writing is just clever. The comedy isn't always 100% a hit because it can have these awkward circumstances, but that's also what makes sense to the nature of the setting, the cultural environment, and the characters that you're all trying to blend together. So that ultimately is what pulls it off to be one of my favorite Christmas films of all time. And at number 2, we have It's a Wonderful Life. One, if not the most definitive way of pulling about something that you may not always see as a Christmas film, but within the Christmas setting, other things that pull about along the way, starts with something that's very different for a type of film, just being the earliest film that's represented on this film list, and just being able to craft this heart-to-heart conversation about the value of life, about George Bailey, how he has to reflect on the differences, see different things for the way he's going about this pathway to suicide, and how that all means so much and hits so much heavier when you personally have been affected by someone that had taken their own life. Being able to connect to human values, the nature of knowing how many different circumstances have led to what may seem like small things you do in your life. It's a domino effect for what you do to affect someone. It affects someone else, can affect someone else, and on and on. So just the way that shapes all our characters speaks so much personality to the film, the different bleak environments, and I personally have always watched this in black and white, which works wonderfully for the nature of this story, the downtrodden relationships, but still being able to get Clarence, who this is an angel who hasn't received its wings, shouldn't be the right fit to change George Bailey as a whole, manages to craft this relationship that goes on this work that makes sense for how that unfolds with the connection with God, how he sends the angel down, and how that all story flows out when George Bailey makes his wish to never be born at all, see the full truth and the effect of all the lives he's really changed. If he didn't save a person, if he didn't change a person's pathway to a downtrodden path, makes it to be something very different that you just be able to enjoy, get the lightheartedness, but also feel the feelings that are right for the emotions that should be depressing in one sense, but still be able to blend it all together, end up on this lighthearted note in one regard to the way they build it all, because he's just facing all the things he's done, and while he's in his downtrodden, this deepest sad moment of his life, he realizes there's hope to so much things he has done in the past, the effects he's played, even though he's always wanted to be adventurous, go out to see the world, and he's always constantly pulled back to the town that he's always lived in. It just does so much to what it ultimately plays off by the end of the film, which takes me into number 1 of the Christmas 25 on 25. We have Die Hard. Now, people will argue for ages if this is a Christmas film, if this is not, but because of that, it makes it the perfect film to fit on this list as a Christmas film, and for that purpose, it's my favorite film above all these other films by the way it pulls on these sort of actions. It makes sense with Bruce Willis having this great performance, Alan Rickman as the villain, just combating against each other. That one scene where they find out each other for the first time, not knowing though who each other are, makes it one of the more suspenseful villain to hero team-ups or meetups that I've seen, going about all these spy tactics, these other things, where this police officer is in the wrong place, but at the right time, for the way that all pulls about for the purpose of saving the story. Of course, this is a Christmas film for the sake that it takes place on Christmas Eve. The events that unfold, the heist taking over the building, couldn't make sense any time else for the plot that works as they actually suggest within the story itself, the dialogue that makes sense to the way it all unfolds. But it's this man trying to get home to his wife, to his family, that brings about this other sort of approach to what you can dissect out of his character, the way that builds upon their relationship where they're kind of separated, but being able to still enjoy the story as an action film, introducing a franchise of other films that aren't necessarily Christmas related, but still being able to unpack so much from the package, what we get out of Bruce Willis' performance, but of course just the action being plain good action and having a good story that ultimately unpacks itself as a real treat to the way that it actually works out by the end of the day, and have all these different characters, some on the side, some on the street outside of the building, the ability that they sort of have this master plan and lock people out, but also trap these people inside as they're trying to invade and steal from this building. How that all makes sense to the nature of the story makes it my number 1 Christmas film on the 25 on 25. So how would you rank these films from your least favorite to your favorite? And if you would like to share any names, make sure to comment down below any of your personal favorite movies that are not on this list related to Christmas. So I hope you have a Merry Christmas, each and every one of you, whatever you are celebrating. If you celebrate Christmas, if you celebrate Elf, just have a great day. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.